Hello, I'm Amy Rogstad. I'm a designer and illustrator from Minnesota. In this video, I'll be starting a new sketchbook. I'm using one of the Etchr sketchbooks. You can purchase this from the Etchr store or from Amazon. It's about $28. When starting out with my sketches, I draw it into my sketchbook and then I erase as much of the graphite as possible while still being able to see my illustration. This prevents the graphite from mixing in with the watercolor, which can muddy up the watercolors. I'll be using my set of Gram watercolors. This is the set that Steve Mitchell curated with Gram. You can purchase it at Wet Paint. It's a really good set. So far, I haven't had the need to grab a different set to paint with when I'm using this set. It has all of the colors that I personally need and use. It is, I believe, meant for creating landscapes, and I paint a lot of animals, plants, critters, nature type stuff, so this set really works well for me. The set has 10 colors, so I have thought about purchasing some extra colors, but I haven't decided what those colors are because, again, I haven't had a need to grab for any other paint color from another set. So in this sketchbook, I'm painting my opening page, so it's kind of like a welcome to my sketchbook page. I have a little snail with some plants and then some typography introducing my sketchbook. And right now I'm starting out with painting the snail. I'm using transparent red with a little bit of neutral tint, and I'm doing the first layer. So I usually start out with my first layer as what color I want the subject to be, and let that dry, and then I paint on top of it. It's called glazing. So I build up the layers slowly to build up the color. This is another trick I do, is I wet the paper a little bit with the watercolor on it, and I'll grab two colors and I'll let the watercolor sort of blend in together and do the mixing on its own, because it'll just naturally spread and mix with each other. So here I'm adding more neutral tint to the transparent red oxide, and it'll just create a really nice blend from one color to the other. And I sort of just like dab my brush around to build up the color. So here you can see it again. So I'm using that neutral tint and the transparent red oxide and just letting the colors blend together naturally on their own, which creates a really nice texture as well. And I'm starting to paint the leaves. For leaves, I typically use azo yellow with the neutral tint to create a green. So yellow and black will create green with watercolor, and it creates this really beautiful like olive-y tone. And the more yellow you add, the more yellow of a tone you'll get, and then the more black you add, the more of an like olive-y tone you'll get. So this is one of my tricks for when I paint green. And I'm painting some little mushroom tops with the quinacridone rose, just to add a little, I don't know, I guess you would say pop of color. I hate that term because everybody in the industry uses it, but I don't know how else to describe it. It's sort of like my accent color. I find it really important to use a limited palette when painting. It just helps naturally create like a cohesive theme within your illustration. So here my main colors that I'm using are brown, green, red, and then I am using a little bit of like Indian yellow or gold that you'll see me paint later on. And it just helps unify the painting and make it so that it's not so distracting with a bunch of other colors, because if you have too much going on, your eye doesn't know where to look. And this is an example of how I do glazing. So we painted that transparent red oxide with the neutral tint as the base layer, and I went over it with the Indian yellow to brighten it up a little bit more and build up that yellow color. And here I'm doing the same thing, but this is with transparent red and neutral tint to create a shadow and build up the dimension of the snail. And so I'm taking that color and I'm putting it in all the areas where I want to push the subject back. So I'm just creating depth. So glazing, I think, is really important. I think it's a really good technique because you're not going too dark right away. You're slowly building up those colors. And that's typically how I use watercolors all the time. My main palette is the cellular palette, and that is also a, I don't know, quote unquote glazing palette. So I'm just always building up my colors slowly while I paint. And I don't do this often, but I do like doing it since I'm a designer. I like to add typography into my illustrations. I only do it when I feel like there's a purpose for it. So like in this situation, I feel like it's purposeful. It's introducing my sketchbook. Maybe I'll try to do more typography throughout the pages. But I don't know, I think it just adds a little character. With this brush, this is a rigger or a liner brush, so I'm going in and adding the details to the leaves. I think it's really important to add those details. I like having my paintings be a little bit more detailed rather than like a loose painting. So you won't see me paint many loose style paintings. They're very planned out, I guess you could say. And here you can see me mixing up that green, so I just added some neutral tint to make it a bit darker and more of that olivey tone. And now I'm gonna go in and add in some shadows and darken darken up the leaves a bit in some areas to make them look less flat. And I'll do this by laying down the color, then I dip my brush in water, wipe it off, and then paint on the area that I hadn't painted on and let the colors kind of blend in with the clean water to create like a more natural gradient. Again, I'm letting the watercolor do the work for me as far as blending, so I'm not like overworking the page and trying to make like a perfect blend myself. I'm just letting the paint and the water do their thing. Another tip I have is I dab in color, and that helps darken it up a bit more, and again it'll just work its way through the water and create a really beautiful blend. And now I'm going to add in some gold paint. So this is a set I am trying to use up. I like this set, it's okay. I don't know the brand offhand, but I actually prefer the Fine Tech gold paints. So for my sketchbook though, I'm just going to use these and work my way through this set. And you can't really see the sparkle that it gives in these shots, but later in the video you'll be able to see like how sparkly this can get. So they are good paints. I believe too they're at a lower price point than the Fine Tech ones. But for my sketchbook, I feel like they work just as good as any other sparkly paint. And then just adding in more of those lines to create a little bit more interest to the shell of the snail. This is me just going in and adding in some details. I like to outline things to make them stand out more against the watercolor paper. And I'm going in and adding in a drop shadow with gold to the typography just to make it stand out a little bit more and add in more of that gold color to make more of a cohesive look to the painting. And you can see me shading again, so I'm laying down that darker red color, which is quinacridone rose mixed with the neutral tint. And then I clean off my brush and I'm just going in with clean water and blending that color in with the original color to create that gradient. So again, the water and the watercolor is doing the work for me. And I'm doing that again here for the shadow of the underneath the snail. I do this a lot on my house paintings too for the grass. This is how I do that step. I'm just building up the color slowly and it's very wet and I'm just letting that watercolor blend out. Another thing I like to do is use the Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils, and I use that to deepen up areas of my painting to create more depth and dimension. And I typically do this as my last step. In my sketchbook, I did not, because later on I changed my mind about a few things. So I'm doing this step now, but it's just my sketchbook, so it'll never see daylight, so I don't really need to worry about my painting being light fast. So it's okay for me to do colored pencil and then go in with watercolor afterwards in this instance. And I'm just really building up like the shadows and creating more texture to the leaves and areas that I feel need a little bit more visual interest. And now I'm going in with a Uniball white pen, and I'm adding in some spots just again to create some more visual interest and texture to the snail and the snail shell. And adding in white, I feel like adds in those highlights to create more of a realistic look and adding more dimension to the subject. And this is where I ended up changing my mind. I wanted to add in a little bit more detail to the leaves and the mushrooms. So I'm going in and adding in those details after I did the work with the colored pencil, which in this scenario is okay because it's just my sketchbook. So I don't have to worry about my painting being light fast. And that is all I have for this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know. If you have any ideas of what I should paint next, comment them below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed watching this. I hope you learned something new. And thanks again for watching. Bye!